Hello and welcome back to the Author Roundup, a special segment of the Book Connection Show where we meet up and coming indie authors and talk to them about the recently released books. Welcome back again. This is Ray Walters. Today's book takes us into an old house full of crooked floors, hidden spaces, family history, and one discovery that changes everything: a trapdoor beneath a bunk bed that opens into a world of secret passageways. At the center of the story are two brothers, Sander and Theo, who are already dealing with something many readers understand: a difficult move, tension at home, and the feeling that life has suddenly become unfamiliar. But once they step into the passageways, the adventure becomes much bigger than escape. They're forced to face fear, temptation, strange worlds, and hard choices while learning what it really means to trust each other and find their way home. It's a fast-moving fantasy adventure with heart, but it also has deeper themes woven in: family, courage, self-control, memory, and the kind of love that often becomes clearest when things go wrong. Joining me to talk about this imaginative and layered story, Secret Passageways in the Land of the Lost and Never Found, is the author of the book, Rick Ench. Rick, welcome to the Author Roundup.
Thanks very much, Ray. And thank you for listeners who are and watching this video on YouTube or on podcast. And welcome.
Congratulations on getting this book published, Rick. And I understand you also have received feedback along the way. So walk us through the feedback that you've gotten so far.
Well, one of the things that I've gotten is that everybody keeps telling me this should be a movie. And so, yeah, I will go along with that. I think it should be as well. My background is in filmmaking. I have a master's degree from a Master of Fine Arts degree from NYU, their graduate film program. So my mind tends to go that way anyway. But that's one. And the other one is that the adults that read it, they do understand that this is a story it's a children's story to some degree. It is, and children like it. The feedback I've got from kids, especially my own two grandsons who love it, it's basically forced me to get this thing published. They said, Grandpa, you have to do this,
Oh.
But also other kids that have read it so far, they just love the story, and they love it for, just the adventure part of it. But also, I think some of them understand that there's more meaning to it than just the nonstop adventure, and adults as well. And I've gotten great feedback from adults. And one of the things that I've heard from adults is they really like this book as a read-to book. Kind of a bedtime read-to book. And not that it could give them maybe a little bit of scary dreams, but usually not, because it's a good ending and it's an adventure story, that will, take them into a dream world, basically.
All right. Well, since you got me interested with your book, I'm going to jump right into it. Your book story starts with a family under pressure. Yeah, you have financial stress, a move, and then you have the two boys, Sander and Theo, who feel like they're uprooted. Why did you want the adventure to begin in such an emotional, real place?
Well, when I wrote the book, and it's the kind of thing that a lot of people are dealing with these days. It starts as sort of a riches to rags story. They were living the high life, and everything was going well, and then things went wrong. And in this case, it was because of the pandemic, and they had to move, and all of a sudden things were different. And the boys, being boys, they kind of blamed their parents for it. They didn't understand the larger forces that were going on in the world that were creating the situation that they were dealing with. So it became sort of a way for me to set up their desire to escape, to find something else, and that's what they did.
All right. Speaking of Sander and Theo, both feel like real brothers, right? Right away, you have the teasing part, the arguing, protecting each other. and pushing each other's buttons. How did you build that sibling dynamic so naturally? Was it something that you grew up with or seeing your kids grew up with?
Yeah, I had brothers. I had one particular brother, 2 years younger than me, very similar in age difference than my main characters. And, you know, my memory of those days is strong. And so, I remember those, though I was the older, I was more like the Xander character, where my brother was more like the Theo character. So I
Uh-huh.
was kind of thrown into the leadership role sometimes. And I always didn't do a good job with that. You can ask my brother about that. But that whole dynamic is really based on experience, my own experience. And there's the whole brother theme keeps repeating because the two characters, my brother, my other brother, Corey, is a great illustrator. He did the illustrations. And so that was another collaborative thing that I did with my other brother. And then
Mm.
uh, the two models, if you want to say, who are in all these beautiful illustrations that my brother did, are my two nephews, the sons of my brother, who was
Mm.
actually we kind of created the Secret Passageways as an imagination game when we were young,
Uh-huh. Okay.
and then my grandsons are the ones who two brothers again, about 2 years apart, are the ones who encouraged me to push get this book published.
Well, you have the old Van Houten house feels almost like it almost feels like a character. It's crooked, it's mysterious, it's layered with history and full of hidden spaces. So, uh, like walk us through and what did you most enjoy about creating that setting?
I wanted to create a setting that at first the boys did not like
Okay.
because they were comparing it to where they had been.
Mm.
And but a space that they came to understand was way beyond where they had been before. And it opened up opportunities that they never thought. So it was, you know, it's that type of thing where something that you think is bad turns out to be something good in a way. And it turns into something you think is boring and dull, turns into the wildest adventure of your life.
Right. It what I felt always when I read through the first few chapters was like I'm not quite sure how this will transition into something adventurous. It started it's a surprise. It's a nice thing because it does look like yeah, it's very natural. It happens quite a lot in some people's lives. You know, you move, you have the riches to rags theme, but then again, the what happens next is that you have the old Van Houten house, mysterious, and now it has secret passageways. What amazed me is that you also created the rules behind it. Very creative, very clever. So, the rules of the secret passageways are one of the most memorable parts of the story. What was your approach to building a magical system that feels imaginative, but still, dangerous?
In a sense, it's really life. I mean, life itself is adventurous and dangerous. It can be. And sometimes things happen that pull us out of our day-to-day sort of mundane existence.
Yeah, yeah,
And there are rules that go with life in general, and then there are rules that specifically I applied to the secret passageway. But those rules are rules that you can extrapolate from, and you can see where those rules actually apply to life in general, if you think of it that way.
yeah.
And there are certain things that, if you want to get where you want to go, you can make those things happen. But in order to do that, there are, if you want to say it, rules that you have to follow. And if you get off course, life can take you in different directions than you thought you were going. And that's one of the themes, and that's why those rules are there, because that's what happens with the boys. They kind of get off the trail,
Yeah.
and then one thing leads to another.
Yeah, yeah. And that's very clever. That's what makes the story fun and interesting for me. Now, you also have the warnings about temptation and shortcuts feel bigger than just plot mechanics. Were you intentionally using the passageways as a way to explore character and choices?
Yes, I mean that's really exactly that's a major theme of the story is
Yeah.
that when you make choices, there are consequences to those choices. And you see it
Mm,
not just in the secret passageways, but you see it with the other characters who appear in the book as they go through and try to find their way back home. And
yeah.
so, yeah, yeah, that's a big part of the story.
So you have now Theo, the younger sibling. You have Theo's fear, hunger, curiosity, and impulsiveness. He makes him very relatable, while the older sibling, Sander, often carries the burden of leadership. So, how did you, and you already mentioned this before, uh, how did you balance their personality so that each brother has an important role to play?
Yeah, that was an important part of the story. When you do a story about with two main characters, which is what this story is, there's neither one of them has a more important role in the story than the other one.
Yeah.
And so you're not seeing the story through one's eyes or the other one's eyes, but you're seeing the story through both of their eyes, if
Yes.
you will. And so creating characters that feel like brothers but have this very distinct personalities was a real goal and somewhat of a challenge in writing it. And
Yeah.
that's an area that I had to go back and rethink and rewrite a number of times. Probably the most rewriting that I had to do with that separation of those characters to keep them real and at the same time to make them very distinct and individual.
And how long did it take you to finish this book, given that you have to rewrite the dynamics part of the story many times?
It took a while. I would get feedback from people in the business, and I would, sometimes I agreed with the feedback, sometimes I didn't, but I would always take all of it to heart, and I would, think, about what I was being told and advice I was being given, and then I would apply it. So it wasn't just a matter of sitting there grinding away writing; it was a matter of collecting information,
Mm.
thinking about it a lot, just kind of going over it in my head as to how to make this work. And yeah, it took a while, but it wasn't all sitting there writing. A lot of it was other things that led to me being able to sit there and make those changes.
Let me squeeze this one in. What was the fun part of writing this book? And what was, should I say, the most challenging part in completing this book?
Well, the fun part is it was, creating all of the sort of situations that the boys had to confront and deal with, a lot of times life-threatening situations. And it was kind of like, those old movies like, Raiders of the Lost Ark, where as soon as he would get past one problem,
Here comes
almost
another.
immediately, here comes the next one, it just one. And so creating that dynamic within the book, where they escape one danger and they take a deep breath and they relax. And next thing you know, uh-oh, and they're heading right to the next one. So that it was really fun to create all of those different things that the boys had to deal with, going through the story. I really enjoyed that. Um, I think the hard part was kind of coming up with the whole story structure at the beginning.
Mm.
Because this was a game, based on a game that my brother and I played when we were kids, an imagination game. And as a result of that, I had the basic idea, but there wasn't any stories that I remembered from being a kid that I could use. So I had to just make up the story as if we were still kids, and it was challenging to come up with the basic story structure. But once I had the characters solidly created, everything else sort of fell into place.
Right. Uh, the book actually blends wonder with genuinely unsettling moments. Uh, yeah, you have tempting doors, you have eerie spaces, and the feeling that the passageways can trick you. How do you how do you decide how far to push the suspense for your younger readers?
Yeah, I mean, I like to push it as far as I can without creating, kind of nightmares and that type of thing. So, uh, you know, I kind of use as a guide, stories that have been told before. And when I was young, I was very influenced by writers like, uh, books like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, let's say,
Yeah.
or Peter
C.S. Lewis.
Pan, or The Wizard of Oz, or even Alice in Wonderland, and those type of stories. So, those are all part of my psyche. And so,
Mm,
they create dangerous worlds that also have humor to them as well. All of this. So that I basically use that as a guide for, how far to take it, I guess.
the Halusa and their history add a much deeper layer to the story, especially with the idea of memory, exile, and survival across generations. What did you want readers to take away from that part of the book?
Well, I've spent over 25 years of my life working with tribal people. I work with the Apache, I work with the Mojave, the Navajo, other tribes mostly in the Arizona area. So I have a
Mm,
deep respect for tribal nations. And so, as part of the story, I wanted to sort of talk about a perspective of the world where sometimes the way things were are better than the way things are in our modern world because
true.
what the Halusa represent is a way of life that has disappeared except for them because they were able
Mm,
to find a way to continue that way of life. And so I wanted to sort of juxtapose and there are wonderful things about the modern world, but there are also things that we lost in the
true.
process. And I
Agree.
wanted to highlight that and to sort of tell that. Plus, there's a magical element to all of that. And even tribal traditions, tribal mythology, if you will, talks about underground. There are stories about underground worlds and underground
Mm.
passageways. And so, that was kind of another thing that I saw that resonance there. And so that helped to come up with that part of the story.
There is also a fascinating contrast between different kinds of lost people in the book. Those, trying to survive, those trying to go home, and those trapped by greed or obsession. Was that contrast intentional from the start?
Yes, it was intentional because yes, we can be physically lost and try to find our way back. But
Uh,
often lost is more than just a physical phenomena. Sometimes it's a law. People get lost because of the choices they make in life. And those
mm,
choices can be based, as some of the characters in the story, based on greed, where you put what you want ahead of your consideration of others, but there's always a price to pay when you make those kind of choices. And so I was highlighting some of those things with the story I was telling. And of course, it goes both ways. Once you
uh,
make a choice, you have to live with the consequences. And that's a recurring
yes.
theme, both for the boys, as you said, and also for the other characters in the story that they confront.
All right. The boys eventually return home. How? That's what our viewers would need to find out. They need to grab a copy of the book. But the adventure has changed how they see their family and even ordinary life. So, what kind of transformation were you hoping readers would notice most in the brothers, Sander and Theo?
Right. So that's a very important uh, question in terms of the book because what they have to do in order to get back is they have to confront their deepest fears. And it's often the way, with people that are trying to get to somewhere else in their life, is they have to confront those things that are scary. And sometimes we end up in a place where we're between a rock and a hard place, where
Mm,
if we go back, it's a problem, and if we go forward, it's frightening. And sometimes we we as humans can get frozen in that spot, but that place where we're
mm,
frozen is not safe either. And so in order to do that, boys have to rely on faith. And it's not it's faith in themselves, yes, and that's very important, but it's also faith in some sort of higher power or guidance that they have to trust in that will allow them to take that step, even in the face of danger and possible destruction, in order to get back to where they want to be, which is back home again in the loving family that with the loving family that they had left behind when they started their adventure.
Okay. The book feels written for young readers, but it clearly has layers adults can appreciate too. How intentional was that dual audience approach when you were writing the book?
One of the things I always did, I did not have sons. I had two daughters, but I always read to them. And they loved when I'd read them books at night before they went to bed, their bedtime stories. And I like the books I liked the most were the books that I got something out of along with the kids. And because, it makes it more interesting as an adult to read the story to your kid when you like the story as well. And so that is really what I was trying to achieve. One of the things I
Mm.
was trying to achieve with the book was to create something that had meaning and resonance, not just for the kids who are reading or hearing the story, but also for the adults that might be reading the story either for themselves or reading it as a read to book for their children. And also for teachers as well, because this book has a lot of different parts in it that basically line up with curriculum in fourth and fifth grade, which is the sort of target readership at fourth, fifth grade and above. But it aligns with some of the things that they study in those grades. And so I wanted teachers to be able to use this as a reading exercise also. And my wife was a teacher and
Mm.
an excellent reading specialist. So she actually guided a lot of my decisions in terms of content and also in terms of reading level.
Okay. Before I close this interview, Rick, where can we grab a copy of your book? For those who are interested to get a copy for your book, where can we point them to?
Well, I think the online booksellers right now is probably the best way for them to access the book. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, other online booksellers. They can access the book as a hardcover,
Mm.
but because of the illustrations, and let me just show this. You can see that this is the. Let me move it back a little bit, but get it in the light. But
Beautifully
that's the
designed
book
cover.
cover. Yeah, just beautiful. And there's illustrations all through this book that are also full page, full color, highly detailed illustrations. So I encourage, you know, readers to get the either soft cover, it's a little less expensive, or the hardcover as a great present in a gift, um, or just to own in your own library. uh, I'm also working on an audiobook. The downside of that is that you don't get the illustrations with the audiobook, but it's you can play it in the car or wherever, on your iPad. um, so that's isn't out yet, but I'm working on the recording of that. I'm doing the narration of it myself
Mm.
because I just am so close to the book. I didn't want someone else to do it, and so that'll be out, in a month or so. Uh, and the electronic version of it is a very inexpensive way to go. So if you have an iPad or some type of reading device like that, it's a great way. It's inexpensive, and you have it then, and it's there, and all the illustrations come with it, beautifully illuminated by your iPad. So that's another way to obtain the book. They can also. I have a website, and they could also contact me through my website. It's a little bit long. It's www.fifthworldproductions.com. But if they can write and leave me a note there, and I can send them a copy of the book as well. And uh, that's up to them. You can spell fifth either way, and it'll take you there, 5th or FIFTH, World Productions altogether, .com.
Make sure to check out the links on the description box of this video or on our podcast. Now, Rick, to close this interview, if a young reader finishes Secret Passageways and starts looking at their own home, family, or fears a little differently, what do you hope they carry with them? And what would you say that reveals about the kind of stories you want to tell?
That's a great question. what I would like kids to come away with is, you know, reinforcing the idea that there are consequences to the choices that you make, but that whatever choices you make, you can always get back home if you face your fears and you work through them. And that's sort of like probably the most important thing that I would want to communicate.
Beautiful message, Rick. Thank you so much for your time in discussing your book with us on the Author Roundup.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
I also would want to give a big shout out to our awesome viewers and listeners for joining us for this interview. Stay tuned for more inspiring conversations on the Author Roundup. I'm Ray Walters. Join me next time as we explore the world of supported self publishing, one indie author at a time.